When we talk about freelancing, most people imagine freedom, the ability to set your own hours, to choose your clients, to work from anywhere in the world. It sounds like the dream, escaping the 9-to-5 grind, not having a boss breathing down your neck, being in control of your own destiny. And for a while, that dream feels real. The first few months of freelancing can be exhilarating. You pick up projects, you build relationships, maybe you even start earning more money than you did at your old job. You feel like you've broken free of the system, like you've outsmarted the traditional path. But then something strange happens. Slowly, the freedom that felt so intoxicating begins to turn sour. The flexibility that once felt liberating becomes overwhelming. The passion that drove you to start freelancing begins to fade. You find yourself working longer hours than you ever did in a corporate job, constantly hustling to find clients, struggling to say no, watching your mental health deteriorate. And eventually the burnout hits. And it's not just you. If you talk to freelancers across industries, writers, designers, coders, consultants, artists, you'll hear the same story again and again. They love what they do, but they're exhausted. They wanted balance, but they feel chained to their laptops. They wanted freedom, but they feel trapped in a cycle of feast and famine. Why is this happening? Why do freelancers, who theoretically have the most control over their work, keep burning out? To answer this question, we have to look deeper than just workload, because burnout is not only about hours worked. It's about the relationship between your nervous system, your identity, your sense of security, and the invisible forces that shape your choices. Freelancing touches all of those things, which is why it's such a fertile ground for burnout. Let's start with the most obvious culprit, instability. A regular job, for all its downsides, comes with a degree of predictability. You know when the paycheck is coming, you know your role, you know the expectations. But in freelancing, that stability disappears. 1 month, you have 3 clients. The next month, none. 1 week, you're swamped with work. The next week, you're staring at an empty inbox, wondering how you'll pay rent. That constant uncertainty keeps your nervous system on high alert. Think about what that does biologically. The human brain is designed to handle short-term stress. If you face a predator, your fight-or-flight system kicks in, your cortisol spikes, your adrenaline surges. But then, once the danger passes, your system returns to baseline. The problem with freelancing is that the danger never fully passes. There's always another deadline, another client to find, another invoice to chase. Your amygdala, the part of your brain that detects threats, stays activated. Your cortisol stays elevated. Your body never gets the signal that it's safe to relax. Over time, that chronic stress wears you down. Your sleep suffers, your focus weakens, your mood crashes. That's the biological foundation of burnout, but it goes deeper. Because freelancing doesn't just stress your body, it stresses your identity. In a traditional job, you're an employee. That role comes with structure, with boundaries, with external validation. You show up, you do the work, you get paid. But as a freelancer, you are not just the worker. You are also the marketer, the negotiator, the accountant, the customer service rep. You're responsible for everything. Which means that every rejection feels personal. Every slow month feels like a reflection of your worth. Every failed project feels like a referendum on your talent. The line between your work and yourself dissolves. And once that happens, burnout becomes almost inevitable. Because now it's not just your energy that's being depleted, it's your very sense of self. This is why freelancers often describe their burnout as uniquely painful. It's not just tiredness, it's despair. It's the feeling that maybe I'm not cut out for this, maybe I'm not good enough, maybe I'll never make it. And those thoughts don't just drain your motivation, they amplify your stress. They push you into overdrive. Because the only way you know how to soothe the insecurity is by working harder. And so you hustle more, you sleep less, you neglect your body, you ignore your relationships. The cycle tightens and the burnout deepens. Another factor is boundaries. In a traditional job, boundaries are imposed externally. Your shift ends at 5 p.m. Your boss tells you when to take vacation. HR sets the rules. But in freelancing, the boundaries are up to you, which sounds great until you realize how hard it is to enforce boundaries against yourself. Because here's the thing, most freelancers don't become freelancers because they love boundaries. They become freelancers because they love freedom, flexibility, independence. They're often people who struggled with authority, who hated being told what to do, who wanted to follow their own rhythm. And so, when it comes time to set limits on their work, they resist. They tell themselves they'll stop after one more email, one more proposal, one more revision. They convince themselves they'll take a day off once things slow down, but things never really slow down. And so they work and work until their bodies give out. And this connects to another layer, perfectionism. Many freelancers are high achievers. They're good at what they do, they take pride in their craft, they want to deliver the best, which is admirable, but it also means they push themselves beyond healthy limits. If a client is unhappy, they take it personally. If a project could be improved, they stay up all night fixing it. If they're charging money, they feel like they owe perfection. But perfection is a moving target. No matter how much they deliver, there's always something more they could do. And so they keep pouring themselves into their work until they're completely empty. The irony is that freelancing also removes many of the supports that might buffer against burnout. In a traditional job, you have coworkers to vent to, managers who can redistribute workload, health benefits that encourage you to rest. In freelancing, you have none of that. You work alone. You bear the risk alone. And when you're struggling, you often feel like you can't tell anyone. Because what if your clients find out? What if it ruins your reputation? What if people think you're not professional? That isolation magnifies the burnout. Because now it's not just stress, it's stress in silence. And here's where trauma enters the picture. Many freelancers are drawn to this path because of deeper psychological patterns. Some grew up in households where they couldn't rely on others, so they learned to rely only on themselves. Freelancing fits perfectly with that. You're independent, you don't need a boss, you control everything. But underneath, that independence may actually be avoidance. It may be a defense against vulnerability, against trust. And that same defense makes it almost impossible to ask for help when you need it. Which means that when burnout arrives, you suffer alone. Others grew up in environments where love was conditional on achievement. If they succeeded, they were praised. If they failed, they were shamed. Those people often become workaholics as adults because work is the only way they know how to earn validation. Freelancing supercharges that pattern because now every paycheck, every testimonial, every repeat client feels like proof that they're worthy. But the flip side is that every slow month, every rejection feels like proof that they're worthless. Their entire nervous system is yoked to the ups and downs of their freelancing career. And that volatility is brutal on mental health. The result is that burnout for freelancers is not just an occupational hazard. It's a psychological inevitability unless you become very intentional about how you approach it. You can't rely on external structures to protect you. You can't rely on managers to notice you're struggling. You can't rely on benefits or HR policies. You have to create the safety net yourself. And for many freelancers, that's the hardest part. Because if they had grown up in environments that taught them how to rest, how to ask for help, how to set boundaries, they probably wouldn't have been drawn to freelancing in the first place. So the cycle continues. The very traits that make people good at freelancing, independence, drive, perfectionism, adaptability, are the same traits that push them toward burnout. And unless you learn to untangle those patterns, freelancing becomes a treadmill. You run faster and faster, but you never really arrive anywhere. Freelancers often live in a strange paradox where they are both their own boss and their own employee. And in that paradox lies a very subtle but powerful psychological trap. On one hand, they crave freedom, the ability to dictate when they work, how they work, and what they work on. On the other hand, that very freedom becomes a weight they carry every single day, because when there are no external rules, no manager checking in, no clock to punch, the mind becomes the only enforcer of discipline. And for many people, especially freelancers who are drawn to freedom because traditional structures suffocated them. The discipline part doesn't come naturally. So what starts as freedom quickly turns into guilt, procrastination, and self-criticism. Every missed deadline becomes not just a scheduling error, but a failure of self. And slowly, the freelancer burns out not necessarily from the sheer volume of work, but from the crushing emotional load of constantly being responsible for themselves in a world that doesn't to give them any external validation. Think about how most people structure their lives. They go to school, the teacher tells them what to do. They go to a job, their boss tells them what to do. They go to a doctor, the doctor tells them what to do. Society is built with authority figures who serve as external regulators of behavior. But freelancers rip all of that away. Suddenly, there's no teacher, no boss, no HR department, no company mission that dictates their direction. It's just them, their laptop, their ideas, and the terrifying expanse of endless choice. And the human brain, particularly one wired toward creativity and independence, often struggles when faced with too much choice. We tend to glorify freedom without realizing that freedom without structure can feel like drowning in the open ocean. This is one of the root causes of burnout among freelancers. It's not just working too much. It's not just difficult clients. It's the weight of existential responsibility. Every project is a reflection of them. Every negotiation is a referendum on their worth. Every slow month feels like proof that they are failing not just as professionals, but as people. And over time, this creates chronic stress. Chronic stress leads to decision fatigue, emotional exhaustion, and eventually burnout. What makes it worse is that freelancers rarely allow themselves recovery time. In a traditional job, you can burn out, and maybe your boss notices and gives you a lighter workload for a week. Maybe you call in sick and still get paid. As a freelancer, if you don't work, you don't eat. So rest isn't truly rest. Even when they take a break, freelancers often sit there worrying about where the next client is coming from, how to pay bills, or whether they've fallen behind. The nervous system never gets a chance to reset. Another psychological layer here is identity. Many freelancers tie their entire self-worth to their work, because their brand, their skill, their output, it's all them. Unlike an employee who can say, I work for this company, freelancers are the company. When their work is rejected, it's not a product that failed. It feels like they failed. When a client criticizes, it's not just a critique of output, it's a critique of self. This fragile fusion of identity and work creates a vicious loop. The higher the stakes of personal identity in each project, the more pressure. The more pressure, the more stress. The more stress, the greater the risk of paralysis or perfectionism. The more they push to overcome it, the more drained they become. Eventually, they collapse. There's also something deeper happening, the subconscious wounds that freelancers often carry into their careers. Many people who choose freelancing didn't just want independence, they were running away from something. Some may have had toxic bosses in the past and swore never to be controlled again. Some may have struggled with authority in childhood, maybe with parents who were rigid or critical, and freelancing becomes an unconscious rebellion. Others may have dealt with rejection or neglect and discovered that freelancing gave them a sense of control they never had before. But here's the thing, when you build your work life around an attempt to heal or avoid past trauma, those unhealed wounds follow you into freelancing. That controlling boss from 10 years ago now lives in your head as your own inner critic. That rigid parent now becomes the impossible standard you hold yourself to. That early rejection now repeats every time a client passes on your proposal. Without realizing it, freelancers recreate the very environments they were trying to escape. And that cycle ends in burnout because no amount of client work can fill an internal void. Another interesting angle here is the role of boundaries. In traditional jobs, boundaries are built into the system. You have working hours, you have weekends, you have paid leave. But for freelancers, those boundaries are blurred or non-existent. Work can seep into evenings, weekends, vacations. A quick email check turns into 2 hours of revisions. A client text late at night pulls them back into work mode. Over time, the nervous system never fully relaxes. And the problem is compounded by the gig economy mindset that glorifies the hustle. Work while they sleep, grind every day. You can rest when you're rich. Freelancers internalize these toxic mantras. And instead of recognizing that they are human beings with finite energy, they start to believe they are machines. The crash is inevitable. And let's talk about money, because burnout is not just emotional, it's financial. Unlike salaried workers, freelancers deal with unpredictable income. Some months are abundant, some are barren. This unpredictability keeps them in a constant state of vigilance. Even when they've earned enough for the month, there's a nagging voice whispering, "What about next month? What if the work dries up?" That voice makes it nearly impossible to relax. And chronic financial anxiety doesn't just burn emotional energy, it erodes creativity. Creativity thrives in safety, in play, in curiosity. But when your brain is in survival mode, worrying about rent or bills, creativity shrinks. Projects take longer, output feels forced, satisfaction drops. Burnout isn't just too much work, it's working from a state of scarcity, fear, and constant pressure. Isolation adds another dimension. Most freelancers work alone. There's no office banter, no colleague to share frustrations with, no team to celebrate wins. Wins feel hollow because there's no one to share them with. Struggles feel heavier because they're carried alone. Loneliness compounds stress. Humans are wired for community, and freelancers often end up living in digital silos, connected only through emails and contracts. Over time, this isolation contributes to depression, anxiety, and you guessed it, burnout. So if we step back, what we see is a web of interconnected psychological forces: freedom without structure, identity tied to work, unhealed trauma patterns, lack of boundaries, financial unpredictability, isolation, and the cultural glorification of hustle. Each one alone can be manageable, but together, they create a perfect storm. Freelancers end up in a cycle where they push harder, collapse, recover just enough to push harder again, and collapse once more. This isn't laziness. It isn't lack of discipline. It's the human nervous system screaming that the current way of living is unsustainable. What freelancers need, ironically, is the very thing they often resist: structure. But not imposed structure. Healthy, self-chosen structure that creates safety rather than restriction. They need to learn how to separate their identity from their work, how to heal the wounds that freelancing is unconsciously amplifying, how to build financial buffers that create peace of mind, and how to find community in what is otherwise an isolating career. They need to treat freelancing not as an escape from rules, but as an opportunity to create rules that support their well-being. And the deeper truth is that burnout will always chase those who believe they need to prove their worth through productivity. Freelancers burn out not because freelancing is inherently broken, but because so many of us enter it with the wrong internal compass. We measure ourselves by output, approval, or income instead of alignment, health, and sustainable growth. The fix isn't to abandon freelancing or to grind harder. The fix is to rewire the way we relate to freedom, responsibility, and self-worth. Until then, burnout isn't a bug in the system. It's the natural outcome of a system designed without compassion for the human at the center of it.